This is Steve Zeltzer with WorkWeek Radio, and I'm speaking with Roxana Marachi, and she is a professor of education at CSU San Jose. So welcome to the WorkWeek show, Roxana.
Thank you, Steve.
So Roxana, why don't you talk about your investigations? You've been studying education. You're in the education department at San Jose State, and you've been investigating what is happening with charters in Santa Clara and around the country. So maybe you can talk about why you decided to get into this investigation.
So I've been at San Jose State now for almost 10 years, and I've been following charters more closely the past 3 or 4 years as I started to hear some of the reports about the rapid proliferation of many of the corporate charter schools. My initial interaction and exposure to charter schools was actually, the first year I was here, I think was the first year that Rocket Ship had opened in San Jose, and it was, all I heard was rave reviews, everything was great. And then a few years later, in my class, I was teaching a unit, I teach educational psychology, and I was teaching a unit on, we were doing, theories of motivation and, mastery-oriented versus competitive environments. And one of my students raised her hand and she said, I work at a rocket ship. And I said, I've heard great things. And she said, no. And she started to then say all of the, very concerning professional development that the students, that the teachers were getting. She was working there in her student teaching, but we no longer no longer place students there. In any case, and so she started just sort of saying a lot of things that I would consider red flags in terms of the attention that they were giving or not giving to the very lowest performing students, basically saying it's okay if, they don't do well, we're going to be focusing on the middle students to move up and all these. So I was it was shocked to me because all I had heard was good things prior to that. And so I started to look a little bit more at what is the school doing? What is charter reform? I had a couple of semesters, unfortunately, of medical leave for surgeries and whatnot that allowed me to have some time to actually do some research and learn a little bit more about what is going on and why such a rapid proliferation. So my concerns, and I have a lot of concerns about the rocket ship expansions. I know some of the folks there. I know that there's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm to create good schools for the kids. I think that there's a disconnect in terms of understanding research on child development, on health, on screen time. I've raised with the schools for the past 2 years concerns that I have about the educational and developmental problems with having excessive screen time for very young children. And they've been, for the most part, dismissed. And more recently, they're starting to pay attention more. But for 2 years, I've provided a lot of research showing that additional, excessive screen time for very young children is not good for their brains, not good for their vision, and the concerns are dismissed. And I just spoke a lot, but in terms of the general, my following of corporate charter reform, it has focused locally and around the rocket ship expansions, and then I have also been following the expansions in, New Orleans, D.C., Chicago, Nashville, across the country. Our communities are being overrun by charter reform, and it's extremely concerning. It's effectively disenfranchising communities that are already disenfranchised.
And Rocket Ship, for those who don't know, is a charter, privately run charter by the KIPP Foundation, and the KIPP Foundation comes out of the Gap Corporation. The Fisher family are quite actively involved in Rocket Ship. Were you surprised about the role of these big companies in Rocket Ship?
I know that Rocket Ship and KIPP both are affiliated with proliferation of charter schools through, there's an organization, Teach for America, that actually provides many of the teachers that teach in these schools. There's a Journal of Education policy piece in 2014 that maps the network, connections, and funders of these schools, of which many, there's Rocket Ship, there's Uncommon Schools, there's a number of, they're trying to crop up some teacher preparation programs that are mostly TFA related as well.
And TFA is
Teach for America.
Yeah.
It's a 5-week, very short training, and they're putting teachers in schools, majority low-income schools of communities of color, with very little training. There's all kinds of controversies around it, and they're, not staying more than 2 or 3 years on average. And so there's this constant turnaround of teachers and that disrupts the learning, it disrupts the communities, all kinds of problems with that. And you asked about the groups and the corporations involved. I wasn't aware of the gaps before you had mentioned it. I am aware of a lot of the technology companies that are funding these schools. Mark Zuckerberg and his foundation funds rocket ship. The corporations that were described in the Journal of Education Policy network mapping piece describes the Gates, the Walton, the Broad Foundation. There are a number of scholars that have written about the real estate motives of many of the corporate charter reform movements in terms of profits to be made in real estate, and that's a concern as well. I still have not received answers from some of my questions about what's going on in Redwood City. There's a report that they're pitching to build on soil that has environmental toxins. It's not the first campus that they've pitched to build on. I have questions about, how is that going to be cleaned up? How do we know that that's going to actually be safe for kids? These are, there's all kinds of documents right now of showing environmental racism and the exploitation of communities by large interests that well-funded interests, basically out of the view of the public. And so I hope that people will be asking some difficult questions and getting answers.
Well, the issue of health and safety, for example, for students and teachers in a public school is supposed to be protected under California education law. Are you saying that there are different rules for the charters as far as health and safety and toxic sites that have to be approved, or what? Is there a difference?
I've gotten mixed reviews. I've actually asked about the requirements for charters to open. From one source, I'm getting the information that they are under less stringent health and safety codes. And from, according to rocket ship, they're saying, oh, no, we have to go through more stringent. And it's unclear to me what the actual situation is, depending on what codes they are required to go under. What I do know is that the schools that they are pitching are, on average, 1/10 the size of what the state would recommend as a reasonable size for an elementary school. And they're packing about 600 students into these very small campuses. The computer labs are also very cramped. I've done 2 site visits, and I had a hard time finding a path to walk without having to pick up a sweater that had fallen, and it was in my path, and it was extremely packed. I have a lot of concerns. Yeah.
And, of course, these big tech companies in Santa Clara County, where you're located, do you think they have an inordinate influence in what's going on in education in Santa Clara County?
That's a really good question. I believe they do. There's a lot of public tax dollars that's being funneled back to these organizations, software and computers and iPads and technology. This is one of the heaviest technology pushers. This is the school that's popularized blended learning.
And what exactly is blended learning?
Blended learning is where they're getting some of the instruction on the computer, and they're doing, activities, in class. But there's a lot of instruction that's being delivered essentially on the computer, and so that's, if they're going to do this as a major part of their learning model, and there's no research on the effectiveness of it or the potential harms or risks of it, I think that's really irresponsible. And the rate at which they're proliferating, I think, is extremely problematic, especially when they are putting 5-year-olds in front of computer screens for up to 2 hours a day, without any information about screen time risks. The parents are, from what I understand, not aware of the excessive harms of excessive screen time. ILS coordinators, we don't know the kind of training that they're getting. One of my concerns also stems from, the fact that every semester I have students in my class who have either volunteered at a rocket ship, or some of them have been employed as the instructional lab assistants, and many of them come to me. When we talk about technology integration and impacts on kids and development, they will come to me unsolicited after class and tell me, I work at this school and I'm concerned because it's a lot of screen time, but they don't seem to think it's a problem. And one student last semester has said that, the kids are complaining of neck aches and headaches, and the response is, no, you get back on the computer. We need to log your hours for the data. So to loop it back to your question about the technology, yes, I think that there's a lot of data being gathered. I think that it's important that, or they find it to be important to pull this data and somehow, use that for the tech companies to maybe try to legitimize more technology in the schools. I don't know. But I think there are very, very strong ties with the tech companies and the schools. I think that's documented from the funding.
And as far as children being affected by looking at computer screens and the dangers of radiation and others, how are children health different from an adult as far as the computers and getting radiation from these machines?
So children are far more susceptible to the risks and the harms. So they have smaller heads, they have thinner skulls, they absorb twice the radiation into their brains. Their skulls absorb 10 times the radiation as adults. And there's a lot of scientists and medical doctors right now that are raising awareness about this concern of wireless radiation and screen time in the schools. Almost about, I think, 70 news reports have been done on this in the past year and a half. I have a blog that has some educator resources that has a collection of research on Wi-Fi, EMF, and screen time radiation. It's at eduresearcher.com if folks are interested. But the concern is also, so there's a radiation risk, and they may argue and say, oh, well, that's in all of the schools. But if children are spending mandated, 3 times more time and exposure to computers and screens than they are required to have in regular public schools, that is excessive exposure that is, not warranted by any of the scientific research. If anything, the science is saying reduce as much as possible. Turn off the devices if they're not being used. Turn off the Wi-Fi. Go to wired connections. Fiber optic cables are far more secure, and they're faster, and they're more, obviously more safe. This is an area a lot of people are not aware of. I just recently, only about 2 months ago, learned about this area of the concerns. My research has previously focused a lot on the vision and the health and the social emotional, the sleep disturbance, obesity issues related to excessive screen time. But there's an enormous amount of research, scientists and medical doctors speaking out about the harms of the radiation on the children as well. Also, another thing, if I may add, the students with Rocketship are primarily of low-income background and Hispanic and Latino background, and they are already at twice the risk of vision problems in terms of amblyopia, which is where one of the eyes is not focusing, and 3 times the risk of astigmatism, which is that the shape of the eye is more like a football rather than a basketball. Rather than being round, it's a little more oblong, and so they're already at risk for vision problems. We know that children's vision does not fully develop until age 7, and so here you're putting students who are already at greater risk in front of extended, amplified screen time, and then dismissing the research on the science and saying that, we're very confident that there's no risk. I got an email last week when I had sent again for the 3rd or 4th time, these are my concerns. And the response I got within, I think, a couple of hours was, we know how much screen time, it's limited, and we're very confident that there's no risk of this use. And so that's concerning to me. I think that's a response that we're seeing a lot of people in power giving, where there's conditions and there's a lot of strong science saying, no, there is a risk, and folks just dismissing it. I don't think I need to make the connections, but you can probably imagine where I'm talking about.
Sure. And we're speaking with Professor Roxana Marachi. She teaches education at San Jose State University. And the issue of more computer time, does that mean less interaction with teachers and less interaction the kids have with each other and a faculty member at a school?
Yeah, that's my understanding, yes. I mean, and for that hour and a half or so that they are in the computer labs, my understanding is that it's silent time. They are to look at the screens. and have their headphones on and not be talking with one another. I've been asking, why isn't it more interactive where they could talk about how they're learning and what questions they have and how did they solve a problem. But my understanding is nope, it's quiet, and they're told to be quiet, and they're not allowed to talk. Some of my, again, I know many former and current teachers who are saying that they have silent lunch. They're not allowed to talk during lunch.
During lunchtime, they can't talk?
During lunch, yes. I don't know about all the campuses, but the campuses of the people that I spoke with said it's silent lunch. They're not allowed to talk. And these are students who are learning English. We're not allowed to talk. I mean, all kinds of I have many concerns, yes.
And another issue that I've heard about, and that is the issue of collocation. Proposition 39 was passed in California on the basis that it would create more efficiency. There was a clause in Proposition 39 that allowed charter schools to take over rooms that weren't being used at public schools. How has that affected education in Santa Clara County that you know about in public schools?
So the one school that I'm aware of where it has erupted into a great deal of problems is in Independence High School in East Side Union High School District. They have between, I think, 3 and possibly 4 charter schools right now housed at the same campus. In early January, there was a meeting to talk about the co-location. There were a lot of concerns about shared resources and problems, and it was attended by over 300. It was a very, very well attended meeting, and people voiced a lot of frustration and concern. And my understanding is that Eastside is working on a mitigation plan to try to move some of the charters to a different location. That's a complicated issue. I work very closely with Eastside, and I support the work that they do. And all I know is that with Independence High School, there's a collocation that has had some troubling outcomes in terms of the experience that the students are having.
Well, how do you have like 3 additional separate charters next to a public school and not have a certain problem?
Yeah,
I mean, sounds like it'd be kind of confusing to people. What's going on? Different different schools in one public high school?
Yes, all on the same campus. And some of the struggles that were cited were issues of resource allocation, where the fields were needing to be shared by all of the charters, and so those students who were at Independence were needing to stay on campus at 9 up until like 10 o'clock at night to just have the space to be able to have their practices, or they were being asked to do their practices at another campus. There were issues of noise during, the time when one of the charter schools had lunch and the students in Independence were in class, and it was disruptive to have, the sound and the right outside of their room. There were parking issues. There were a number of issues that were raised.
It sounds
so now
like
they're working. And to the credit of the school district, they really did, have public forums. They're listening to the students and to the teachers, and I feel like they're being very responsive. So I think that's I've been impressed with the way that the school district has been at least listening and trying to resolve the issues. I do worry that there's not enough awareness about the impact of co-locations and how I guess how this has been playing out in other cities is just being mirrored right now in Santa Clara County. And I think there's a lot of people who are not aware of basically the harms that are about to be unleashed unless we pay closer attention to the kind of mistakes that have been made in other cities, and we don't repeat those mistakes here.
Now, one issue that has been exposed nationally is the Fadula Gulen chain of schools in California that's connected to the Magnolia chain. What role has Magnolia played in the South Bay?
The only thing I know about Magnolia is that there is one school that is chartered by the county board. I don't know the details of that school. I have not been following that school as much. I have a colleague who is involved in the statewide complaint. There's either a lawsuit or UPC complaint against the chain of Magnolia charters. So they're under investigation now, from what I understand. But I can't speak to Magnolia specifically because I haven't been following that.
I mean, the whole approval of charters, it seems under the law that They can go to the county. Then if they get rejected by the county, they can go to the state. It seems to be that there are a lot of means by which a charter can get established, even if the local community doesn't want a charter. Is that the case?
Yes, that is the case, and that is actually what is happening right now in the East Bay. In Mount Diablo School District was approached by Rocketship to open another charter there. They denied it. It got appealed to the county. The county unanimously denied it, and now it's being appealed to the state, despite tremendous resistance from the Contra Costa County community. They've got a lot of people who are concerned about the charter expansion there and who have been speaking out. If you look at the live stream video of the statewide charter commission, where they voted whether to recommend this or not, you heard a lot of community members. One gentleman, it was the second to last speaker, came out and said, he took the day off work to be there, and said, my community, they came to get these signatures to say, please open these schools. And he has neighbors basically coming in tears and saying, I didn't know what I was signing. They lied to us. I wish I didn't sign that. I didn't know what I was signing. And so lots of concerns about the ways that they are saying that there's, this community support to try to open the school. There's too much community resistance to say that there's community support. And so you're absolutely right. There is a lot of there's almost a green light process by which charters can get approved, and then once they are approved, they are under much less scrutiny, and it's very difficult for the public to be able to have any say in what they do. They have private board meetings. Their board meetings, for the most part, are during the day, 11 a.m. You show me any public school district, county school board that has their meetings during the day. It's not easy for people to make it during the day.
And it seems like the charter school laws were basically written to allow these charter schools to pretty much write their own bill as far as what they wanted to do. And the funders of the charter schools, as you say, are the Walton Foundation. They are the owners of Walmart, the Gates Foundation, the Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, the Broad Foundation, Eli Broad Foundation. I mean, it seems like they're really playing a big role in pushing and marketing these charters. They do advertising, I understand, as well.
I'm not aware of the advertising, but I know they are heavily funding the charter movement. And if you look back to the roots of the laws that allowed for the charter expansion, they are rooted in the ALEC, which is the American Legislative Exchange Council. I hope I got the acronym right. But yeah, they are rooted in a very strong corporate interest.
And also, are they opposed to unions, these charters?
They are hiring, majority are hiring Teach for America, and any conversation that I've had has definitely not been one where they are union friendly.
Now, if they hire Teach for America, these are mostly young students who've just graduated from college. Does that give them a financial incentive to have not professional teachers, but just young teachers with a high turnover? And how does that affect the education process?
Well, I think that it affects the education process negatively. There are research studies showing that high turnover of teachers is harmful to students, and it creates instability and fracturing of the community. It's a constant turnover. There's going to be higher costs for continuous professional development because you're constantly getting new folks in there and then folks leaving. They're not trained well. You have many Teach for America teachers speaking out about the poor training that they got, especially in special ed. You have teachers who've only taught for 2 years being promoted to be principal of a school without any admin training, without any understanding of special ed law. I think it's problematic on so many levels. There's an excellent book I recommend. It's called Teach for America Counter Narratives. It's written by Jameson Brewer. He's a former TFA alumni corps member who is now writing, basically. He's an academic. He's actually not, I believe he's finishing his doctoral degree, and is writing about the experiences that Teach for America alumni have had that have been concerning to them. in terms of the ways that they were trained and the ways that they are being asked to treat students, primarily students of color. And so it's an excellent book. I just recommend it, Teach for America, Counter-Narrative.
And it seems nationally, the Arne Duncan, the former Secretary of Education appointed by President Obama, the new proposed Secretary of Education, have been pushing Teach for America as a way of improving, reforming education system in the United States. Has there been really an evaluation of the effect of Teach for America nationally?
For that question, I would say we would need to look at the research of Dr. Julian Vasquez-Heilig. He is the chair of the Educational Leadership Department at Cal State Sacramento, and he's done a lot of research on CFA, and I would defer that question to him. I'll say go check out some of his work online related to CFA, and there are all kinds of problems. One of the things I just recently read about the new, the soon-to-be he's acting Secretary of Education now, but John King, he used to teach at the Uncommon Schools, which is also one of the offshoots of TFA, which is related to the rocket ships and the KIPs, and the same network of corporate charter schools that does their training in very similar ways, and that, again, is rooted in Teach for America.
Now, when charter school laws changed in California in 1992, it was put forward as a way of reforming education and making education better in many districts. And now in California, it seems that the charter schools are encroaching on districts where you have high-performing schools, and parents and students really value those schools, like in Fremont Unified School District. Is there a reason that these charter schools are now trying to go into these other districts that don't have the similar kind of problems as do Los Angeles or working-class Black, Latino, poor areas that charter schools have been predominated in?
That's a good question. I would say that with a lot of the charter reforms, again, there are a lot of profits to be made, unfortunately, and there's a lot of documentation about the ways that the funding is being funneled away from the traditional public schools and into private coffers where we don't know where it's going. And so my best guess of why they're trying to expand in all different areas is that they're going to have the capacity to be able to draw from more of the public tax dollars.
And the other issue is segregation of schools in different areas, that a lot of these charter schools are mostly Black or mostly Latino. Is there a reason for that? You
would have to ask the folks who are trying to pitch the charter schools. You're right that there's a concern about resegregation of schools. If you look at the majority of the charter schools, the ones that I've seen in our area, they are serving one ethnicity far more than they are others, and it's adding to resegregation. It's certainly not helping matters. They're not more integrated schools. They are far more segregated schools. The last review that I did, ACE Charter School, ACE Middle School, it was ACE Empower. It's overseen by the county. And on the day of their renewal, I saw the petition. I thought, oh, wow, it was a long petition. It was about 100 and I can't remember, over 100 pages. And I've been following a lot of research on school climate and suspensions, and I saw an overrepresentation, very high suspension rates. So their suspension rates were 4 times higher than the district, the county, and the state. And then we're concerned about disproportionality. So I looked, okay, what's the ethnicity? And they could argue we don't have disproportionality, but it's because they had 100%. 100% of the students who were suspended were of Latino background, Latino and Hispanic background. And so in terms of you're saying about the segregation, resegregation, yes, it seems as though many of the charters are catering to one ethnic group rather than trying to integrate or being more diverse. I don't know the enrollment policies or what they're doing to try to create more diverse schools, but it certainly seems as though the way the enrollments are working out, they're not diverse.
Now,
and I will say also related to the suspensions issue at ACE, I have been in touch with the director, Greg Lippman, and I'm going to be talking with them and, giving some resources that would help the school climate in the situation. I just sort of brought it to the attention of the board at the very last minute because I thought they had 20 pages of of discipline policy, but no data. So I thought this is an important question for school boards to ask of what are the suspension rates? If this is something we're nationally and statewide looking at disproportionate discipline, exclusionary discipline in terms of suspension, we need to be asking these questions when charters come up for renewal.
And the other issue that I think is of serious concern to parents and students, and that is the whole testing mania that's going on, Common Core and Pearson and Company, who make money from testing. Is that an issue in the charter schools as well, as far as testing and this time amount spent on testing in both charter and public schools, for that matter?
This is an issue that impacts charters and regular district schools. It's a lot of funding being allocated towards the testing. I think over $600 million of federal and state tax dollars going towards the development and the administration of these tests. I've written extensively about this. I've spoken to the State Board of Education and written several letters about my concerns with the tests. They are not reliable. They're not valid. They're not fair. They don't meet any of the criteria for use. Basic standards for assessment. They don't meet any of those criteria, and yet they are being pushed out as though they're actually giving us some useful data about how kids learn. And it's really problematic. It's also forcing school districts to pump more money again into purchasing computers, purchasing software, getting the kids online, and learning how to use the tech very young. Now it's pushing more screen time even younger, without any indication that this is good for kids, without attention to the health risks again. And again, all kinds of problems in terms of the outcomes and the scores. One interesting point to note is that the funders of the corporate charter reform movement are the same exact funders of the testing agenda as well. So you've got the Gates, the Rhodes, and the Waltons funding these same computerized tests, and it's problematic on many levels. One interesting point, last week there was a lot of buzz in the education world about the new Smarter Balanced and Park tests. There was some sort of an external evaluation to say that these are high quality tests. Well, external evaluation means people who are not affiliated with the test developers or the test administrators should be doing a research evaluation to see that is this actually a good test or not. The lead author of this external evaluation is the same author that did the 2014 field test for Smarter Balance and also worked for 6 years for Educational Testing Service, which it has a $240 million contract with the state of California to administer these Smarter Balance tests. So that is certainly not an external evaluation by any means. And the lead author is, used to work for Smarter Balance, wrote a report on behalf of Smarter Balance Consortium, and used to work for ETS, which is the company that benefits from the rollout of these tests. So I would love to see an investigation of all of these intersections, and I think it's extremely problematic. I think the public is being duped into thinking that this is the next generation greatest thing, and there's no evidence for that. It's all kinds of technological barriers. There were 46,000 appeals to the state about problems with the testing. Not a lot of people know about that, but it's in state documents. In any case, I could go on about this.
Now, you were in Los Angeles recently, and you spoke to the U.S. You spoke to the Department of Education.
Yes, so it was an open hearing. It was a public hearing to get comments on recommendations for the new education law, every Student Succeeds Act. This is a law that's over 1,000 pages long. It was pushed through very quickly, and there's all kinds of questions of what exactly is in it. And my comments, it was 5 minutes of public comments. I spoke, the first half of it was related to the concerns about the testing and all of the problems with the validity, reliability, fairness of the test, well-documented technological barriers, design flaws, and the 46,000 appeals to the state. None of that has, been taken into consideration. And so the first half was on that, and the last half was on encouraging the federal government to pay closer attention to the health risks, screen time with children, and to put on their the technology page, teched.gov, and the Connect Ed initiative. It's really pushing a lot of technology without any indication of safety concerns, any information for parents. We need to bridge the research field in this area.
And there's an initiative in California to repeal charter laws in California. Do you think that most people in California are aware of some of these issues that we've been discussing here about charters and the potential danger to public education by charters?
I don't believe the majority of Californians are aware of it. I think that if they're tuning into the news, they're getting the news that is being funded by a lot of the corporate interests that are pushing the charter agenda. So you will read a lot of charter-friendly news reports. And so I think that the majority of what the public is getting is a part of the story and not the full story. And I think if they look at what's happening with charter reform in other cities, they will be more tuned into the harms that are occurring to especially communities of color that are being overtaken by charters. I think there needs to be more of an education, a public information about the harms of corporate charter reform. There is an Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools, is an organization, Becky's, I think they're centered in Chicago. Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools, I think it's reclaimOurSchools.org. There are a number of organizations, Journey for Justice, Network for Public Education. They're affiliated with hundreds of other civil rights and social justice organizations that are calling for a moratorium on charters. They're calling for a halt to the expansions. And I think that it would be really helpful for California to also be tuned into these efforts. One of the exciting things was last week there was a national walk-in. So, you've heard of walkouts? This was a walk-in where hundreds of schools participated across the country, walking in to their schools together as communities and saying, we're going to stand strong and we're going to defend public education and we're going to take care of our communities and take care of our schools. And it was a real, I think, strong show of confidence and support and reclaiming of public education. I was excited to see that. You can probably see you do a hashtag walk-in and you'll see some of the pictures. It's very inspiring.
And what is your website again?
My website is eduresearcher.com. So it's EDU researcher, RESEARCHER.com.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for participating in WorkWeek Radio. We've been speaking with Professor Roxana Marachi. She's a professor of education at San Jose State University and has been studying the effect of charters in public education, what it means to the children. So thank you for joining us on WorkWeek Radio, Roxana.
Thank you so much.